For me, coming to university was utterly life-changing. Neither of my parents had been to university, and my mother only had 2 years of high school education. So there weren't a lot of university-educated people in my life, and my sense of what university would be like was largely formed by reading English novels, far too many English novels at school. So I really didn't know what to expect when I came to university, and it cracked my world wide open, really. I encountered progressive ideas about all manner of things coming to university in the early 1980s. I encountered people who were campaigning against racism and apartheid. I encountered people who were interested in stopping war because the Cold War was on foot. I met feminists for the first time. I heard left-wing political ideas explained and made interesting and relevant. There were so many things about coming to university that were amazing, and probably one of the profound ones was meeting people who were really different to my family and the people I'd met at school. So university totally changed my life in that it opened up my sense of what the world was. It very much opened up my sense of what I could be and what my life choices were. So I came from a family where there was one shelf of books in the whole house, and where my parents would take us to the library a lot. It's not that people weren't interested in books, but we didn't have a history of university education in my family. And we didn't have a history of thinking that girls could do all kinds of exciting stuff. So as a child, I was often told that I should be a nurse or be a hairdresser and have some skills I could use after I got married and have children. So coming to university was quite a change from that very narrow concept of what a woman's life could be. That was the predominating one when I was a child. When I came to university, I first started doing arts, and I enrolled in a wide range of subjects. When I saw the calendar on the first day of O Week, I was just so excited to think that there were so many things I could learn about. I was unbelievably excited by the calendar, which now makes me sound like a nerd, and probably fair enough. So I did philosophy and logic, I did politics and English. It was fabulous. A year or two into that, I had the insight that I may not be able to get a job with this degree. And I had a friend who was very committed to law and who did honours about the time that I was starting. And he made law sound exciting and made it sound as though it was all about social justice. And so I enrolled in law and found that it was sometimes to do with social justice, but often not. To be honest, I found studying law extremely boring. I also found that it was a form of thinking that came very readily to me. I think I've always been quite a linear thinker. I grew up in very rule-bound situations, so law made a lot of sense to me right from the beginning. And when other students were despairing that they'd ever learn to think like a lawyer, I was very puzzled about what they were getting at. So I'd have to say that most of the life-changing stuff probably happened in my arts degree. By the time I started in law, I found I'd become less conservative. I found studying law overwhelmingly conservative and not too exciting. I studied law at Adelaide University, and I started in about 1983 or 1984. And I did meet some amazing people in the law school here, including some people who really changed my view of the world. So John Keeler, for example, was teaching concepts about income maintenance and welfare law that really gave me a whole new way of looking at poverty and wealth in Australia, and that, coupled with the studies that I was doing in politics, was really quite life-changing. And there were other amazing people teaching here when I was a student here, and I made lifelong friends as a law student too. It's hard to say what the culture in relation to LGBTIQ identities was like when I was a law student, because it still wasn't a really huge issue for discussion. When I was a law student, the enrolment in law was still more than 50% male, and male domination in the legal profession and in law schools was a big issue, and I was a firebrand young feminist, or at least I was trying as hard as I could to be a firebrand young feminist, and there'd been a generation of very active feminists in the law school who were a few years ahead of me, who'd blazed a trail for thinking about gender in the law school. So thinking about gender was still quite a big thing. There were big discussions while I was a student at Adelaide about things like whether we should use gender neutral language and whether there should be an affirmative action policy in the hiring of staff. And those issues were really controversial. So if you can hear how controversial they were, I think you can probably grasp that there wasn't a very robust culture of equality and welcome for queer folk in the law school when I was a student here. There were some staff who either were or were believed to be gay or lesbian on the staff when I was a student here, and I did hear them talked about in tones of disrespect by students. Didn't warm to that. There was no one who was openly out, although it did seem as though there were some very open secrets about people who were working here. I certainly knew other people who were queer and who were students here when I was a student here, but not very many. In retrospect, I think it's really hard to say how safe or how welcoming the law school was as a place to be out and queer at the time, because I was still at a point where I was so scared that it was hard for me to tell whether the world was really a safe place for me or not, because my fear was much closer to my field of vision than the reality of what the reaction might have been. And I think it's one of the difficult things about coming out, that you don't know what the result is going to be. You don't know what will come back at you once you come out. And once you've come out, it's very hard to go back. And I had those examples of there being people in the law school who were thought to be gay, who were being talked about by other people. I knew they didn't have much choice in how they were being talked about. I began the process of coming out when I was a university student and while I was a law student. And I don't think you can ever just come out once. I think coming out is really a process, and coming out publicly is also a process, because there are lots of different publics that you can be open about different things in. On the other hand, once you have begun to come out, you're no longer completely in control of your business, your information, the way people think about you. So I think it's one of the things you know when you come out, is that you're putting information out and it's going to travel in ways that you don't know, can't forecast, won't necessarily know about for a long time, if ever, and that you can't control. So I certainly came out to my friends, all of my friends. I came out to my family while I was still a law student. And because I came out to my friends, that meant I was out at university to a lot of people. But it doesn't mean that everyone who knew me knew that about me while I was a student. When I finished my degrees, which was 1989, I had by then already worked for a year as a research assistant at the law school, and I finished feeling very disenchanted with the whole idea of a career in law. I didn't go on to do postgraduate qualifications for practice, so I spent actually a year or two baking cakes for a living and running a small business. And at some point I was filling in for somebody selling the cakes instead of just baking them. And I was at the Art Gallery coffee shop, and some staff from the law school came in and realised that I was doing that and were apparently surprised. So they offered me research work, and I went back into doing research. And at some point, some of the people I was working for proposed that I should apply for a job teaching. And I must admit, at first I thought they were joking, and then I realised that they really weren't. So I've never practiced law, I've always been an academic, and as an academic, I haven't felt a need to cover up who I am particularly. That's not to say it's relevant in every conversation either. Staff at the school where I work, I think, have known that I'm not heterosexual for the whole time that I've worked there, and that's never presented a problem for me among staff in the school. That's not to say that everyone who knows me in my place of work as a fellow worker would agree or accept or approve, but most of them are far too polite to say anything about it if they don't, and quite conceivably there are things about them I don't completely approve of or accept, and we've all chosen to maintain a polite silence on this question. Being out in the classroom, I think, is a little bit different. When I started work at Flinders University, Adelaide is a very small place, so there were approaches from students who enrolled there that indicated to me that I was known to be queer among some of the student body at least. On the other hand, I had a long relationship with a man after I started work at Flinders University, and there was a very funny episode when I appeared at Feast after the end of that relationship with my new partner, who I've now been with for 16 years. And we sort of walked onto the Pride picnic at Feast, and a group of my students stood up to greet me as a new lesbian. It was funny. It was so sweet, but it was also so funny because it was like everyone's making assumptions they don't realise that they're making. So really, discrimination and intolerance haven't been a big feature or even a middle-sized feature of my career teaching law. I think it's a position where I've got a lot of privilege that helps to buffer me from the prejudice that people may well hold but choose not to offer toward me because I'm really in a privileged position in this particular job. So I would have to say that most of the trouble that I've had in terms of prejudice, discrimination and violence has happened outside of work, often in contexts where I've got way less access to all of the scaffolding that keeps me safe at work. I think that I have chosen to be out in the context where I work and to write about things and lobby about things, be open, in part because I think I'm in a position where I can do that, and I know a lot of people who can't, who couldn't be safe or couldn't be sure that they could hold their job down if they were as out at work as I have been. And I kind of think that comes with a bit of a responsibility that I've chosen to take up. As an academic who's dealing with students all the time, I tend to think it's up to those students to say for themselves what the main issues that face them are. But I must say that in this period where we've had so much incredible progress in the decline of homophobia and transphobia in my lifetime has been amazing. This is really a very fast-moving social change movement, and that's very exciting. But I guess as that is declining, there's this rearguard action being fought by people who'd like to hold on to very traditional ideas of family and gender, and that can be very bruising. So I guess one of the things I'd like to say is that you can be proud of who you are, and that even though you may be afraid and hard things will happen, you don't have to give up, you don't have to give in, and you don't have to please everybody in life. I think it's really important to understand that you can live the life that you want, you can be the person that you want to be, and that may not please everybody, but it doesn't matter what you do, you will never please everybody. So I think it's really important to take your courage in both of your hands and move forward into the life that you want to have. I think diversity is part of what makes humanity rich and interesting and vibrant. I can't honestly see why it makes sense to try and be like everybody else in any respect. And this is just one of the forms that human diversity takes. It's one of the glorious forms that human diversity takes. So I say, embrace, enjoy.